The fluorescent lights above me hummed with a frequency that made my skull ache. I could hear my own breathing inside the surgical mask. Shallow, uneven, unprofessional. The boy's eyes locked onto mine, and they were the clearest shade of green I'd ever seen. Too clear, too aware. His small hand gripped the edge of the gurney, knuckles white against the pale blue hospital sheets. Am I going to die? The question hung in the sterile air between us. No tremor in his voice, no tears. Just 7 years old and asking the one thing I wasn't prepared to answer on my second week of residency. The monitors beeped steadily beside us. Heart rate, oxygen saturation, blood pressure, all normal numbers that told me nothing about the terror clawing its way up my throat. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Helena Voss's footsteps approaching down the corridor. Measured, confident, everything I wasn't in that moment. She would know what to say. She would have the answer, but she wasn't here yet. And this child's eyes were searching mine for something I desperately wanted to give him. The truth was, I didn't know if he was going to die. And what I discovered in the next 72 hours would change everything I thought I understood about being a doctor. My name is Noah Reyes, and 3 months ago, I walked through the sliding doors of St. Halstead Hospital, wearing a white coat that still smelled like the plastic it came wrapped in. The weight of it on my shoulders felt both too heavy and not heavy enough, like wearing borrowed confidence from someone who actually deserved it. St. Halstead sits on the northern edge of a mid-sized American city that nobody's heard of unless they've driven through it on their way somewhere else. The building is old red brick on the outside, all modern glass and chrome on the inside, like someone tried to hide the history beneath a layer of corporate renovation. 7 floors, 300 beds, a level 2 trauma center that sees everything from car accidents to heart attacks to the everyday emergencies that remind you how fragile human bodies really are. The hospital has a particular smell that you notice most on your first day and then gradually stop registering. A mixture of antiseptic, floor cleaner, cafeteria food, and something else underneath that's harder to name. Fear, maybe, or hope. Or the strange combination of both that exists in a place where people come to be saved. I chose internal medicine for my residency because I wanted to solve puzzles. That's what they tell you in medical school. That diagnosis is detective work, that every symptom is a clue, that if you're smart enough and thorough enough, you can figure out what's killing someone before it's too late. They don't tell you about the weight of making decisions when you're not sure. They don't tell you about the gap between textbook knowledge and the messy reality of a human being looking at you like you hold their life in your hands. Because sometimes, you do. My parents didn't understand why I chose medicine. They wanted me to be an engineer, maybe a businessman, something stable, something that didn't require years of brutal training and mountains of debt. My father spent 30 years working construction, building houses for families who would never know his name. My mother cleaned offices in downtown Houston, wiping fingerprints off glass doors and emptying trash cans for executives who rarely said thank you. They sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities they never had. And when I told them I wanted to be a doctor, my mother cried. Not from disappointment, from pride so fierce it scared me. Because to her, a doctor was someone who mattered, someone who made a difference, someone who could look at suffering and do something about it. I think about that every time I put on this white coat. Every time I make a decision that could save or end a life. Every time I stand at a patient's bedside and try to be worthy of the trust they're placing in me. The weight of expectation is heavy. Not just from my parents, but from every patient who looks at me and sees that white coat and assumes I know what I'm doing. Most days I feel like an imposter, like someone is going to figure out that I'm just guessing, making educated approximations, hoping I'm right more often than I'm wrong. Medical school prepared me for the science. It didn't prepare me for the fear. The pediatric rotation wasn't supposed to start until my 4th month, but Dr. Marcus Webb, the chief resident, pulled me aside on a Tuesday morning in late September and told me they needed coverage. Dr. Chen had called in sick, and the pediatric ward was short-staffed. Just for today, he said, just to help out. I'd be shadowing Dr. Voss, who had 15 years of experience and could probably diagnose pneumonia from across a parking lot. You'll be fine, Webb said, clapping me on the shoulder with the kind of casual confidence that attending physicians seem to generate naturally. Pediatrics is straightforward. Kids are resilient. They bounce back. I wanted to believe him. The pediatric ward occupied the entire 3rd floor of St. Halstead. The walls were painted in soft yellows and blues, with murals of cartoon animals and space rockets that some volunteer artist had probably donated their time to create. The nurses' station sat in the center of the floor, a circular hub where 3 nurses worked behind curved desks, their scrubs covered in patterns of stars and dinosaurs and smiling suns. It was quieter than the adult floors, softer. The overhead lights were dimmed slightly, and somewhere down the hallway I could hear the faint sound of children's music playing from a television. A young mother walked past me carrying a sleeping toddler, her face drawn with exhaustion that went bone deep. She moved slowly, like each step required conscious effort, and I wondered how many nights she'd spent in one of these rooms, watching monitors blink and listening to her child breathe. The nursing staff moved with practiced efficiency, their voices gentle even when they were rushed. I watched a pediatric nurse, couldn't have been more than 25, kneel down to talk to a little girl who was crying about an IV placement. The nurse didn't hurry her, didn't dismiss her fear, just sat there on the floor in her dinosaur scrubs and held the girl's hand until the tears stopped. That's when I realized pediatrics wasn't just about treating children. It was about treating fear itself. A boy, maybe 9 years old, rolled past me in a wheelchair pushed by his father. The kid was bald from chemotherapy, but he was smiling, showing his dad something on a tablet. They were laughing about a video they were watching. In the midst of cancer treatment, they'd found a moment of normalcy, a moment of joy. That's what struck me most about the pediatric ward in those first few minutes. The resilience, not just of the children, but of their families. The way they adapted to the worst circumstances and found ways to keep going. Dr. Helena Voss found me standing near the nurses' station, probably looking as lost as I felt. Dr. Reyes. Her voice was exactly like her appearance, precise, controlled, efficient. She was maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the fluorescent light when she tilted her head. Her white coat was immaculate, not a wrinkle, not a coffee stain, not a single sign that she'd been working for the past 6 hours straight. "Good morning, Dr. Voss. Have you worked pediatrics before?" "Only a 2-week rotation in medical school, mostly observation." She studied me for a moment, her dark eyes moving across my face like she was reading vital signs. Then she nodded once. "The principles are the same as adult medicine. The execution is different. Children can't always articulate their symptoms. You have to look harder, listen better, trust your instincts but verify everything. And remember, you're treating 2 patients in every room, the child and the parent." "Understood. We have morning rounds in 15 minutes. There are 8 patients on the floor today. Most of them are post-surgical observation or minor infections. Nothing complicated." She glanced at her tablet, scrolling through what I assumed was the patient list. "There is 1 admission from last night that requires close monitoring. 7-year-old male. Severe abdominal pain, elevated white blood cell count, fever. We're running additional tests today." Something in her voice shifted on that last sentence. Not quite worry, but something adjacent to it. Caution, maybe, or uncertainty. "What's the working diagnosis?" I asked. "That's what we're going to find out." We walked together toward the patient rooms, and Dr. Voss began to brief me on the floor's routine. Morning rounds started at 7. Lab results were typically available by 6:30, which meant the night team would have already reviewed them and flagged anything concerning. Medications were administered on a strict schedule. Parents were allowed to stay overnight in the rooms, and most did. "Pediatrics is different from adult medicine in many ways," Dr. Voss said as we walked. "Children heal faster, but they also decompensate faster. A child can look fine one moment and crash the next. You have to stay vigilant. Trust your observations. If a child looks sick to you, they probably are, regardless of what the numbers say. What if the numbers in my observations don't match? Then you investigate until they do, or until you understand why they don't." His name was Ethan Paulson. Room 314, 3rd bed from the nurse's station. When Dr. Voss and I entered the room, I saw his mother first. Mid-30s, blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail, dressed in yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt that looked like she'd grabbed it off a bedroom floor in a panic. She stood beside the hospital bed with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, and her eyes had that particular kind of redness that comes from crying for hours and then trying to stop. A man sat in the corner chair. Ethan's father, I assumed. Mid-40s, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and jeans. His tie was loosened at the collar like he'd left work in a hurry and hadn't thought to change. He had his elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He looked up when we entered, and the fear in his eyes was raw. "Mrs. Paulson, Mr. Paulson," Dr. Voss said gently. "This is Dr. Reyes. He's going to be helping me monitor Ethan today." The mother nodded but didn't look at me. Her attention was fixed on the small figure beneath the white sheets. Ethan lay perfectly still. His eyes were closed, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping. His breathing was too careful, too controlled, like he was concentrating on not moving because moving meant pain. I'd read his chart before entering the room. Admitted at 11:47 p.m. the previous night through the emergency department. Chief complaint, severe abdominal pain, 8 out of 10 on the pediatric pain scale. Fever of 102.4 degrees. Vomiting. Loss of appetite for the past 3 days. White blood cell count elevated at 14,000. High enough to indicate infection or inflammation, but not catastrophically so. The emergency physician had suspected appendicitis, but the ultrasound was inconclusive. The CT scan showed inflammation in the intestines, but the appendix appeared normal. They'd admitted him for observation and started him on IV antibiotics as a precaution. Dr. Voss approached the bed. Ethan, can you open your eyes for me? The boy's eyelids lifted slowly, those green eyes bright and alert despite the pain. How are you feeling this morning? Dr. Voss asked. It hurts. His voice was small but steady. Can you show me where? Ethan moved his hand slowly, pressing it against the lower right side of his abdomen, the classic location for appendicitis, except the scans said his appendix was fine. Dr. Voss performed a gentle examination, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She pressed carefully on different areas of his stomach, watching his face for reactions. Ethan winced twice. The second time, he pulled his knees up toward his chest instinctively. I watched her technique carefully. She wasn't just examining him, she was reading him. Every facial expression, every involuntary movement, every hesitation. The examination was a conversation between her hands and his body, and she was fluent in a language I was still learning. When did the pain start? Dr. Voss asked. Mrs. Paulson answered, 3 days ago, Thursday afternoon. He came home from school and said his stomach hurt. We thought maybe he ate something bad at lunch. And it's gotten worse since then? Yes. By Friday night, he couldn't eat anything. He threw up twice. We gave him some Tylenol and thought it was just a stomach bug. You know, something that would pass. When did you decide to bring him to the hospital? Yesterday evening. The pain got so bad he was crying. He never cries. Her voice broke slightly. He's tough. He plays soccer, falls down, gets back up. But last night he couldn't even walk without crying. I made mental notes as she spoke. Progressive worsening over 72 hours. Anorexia, vomiting, severe pain, all consistent with appendicitis, except for the imaging. Has he had any diarrhea? Dr. Eyes, Voss asked. No. Blood in his stool? No. Any recent travel? No. We haven't been anywhere. Anyone else at home sick? No. Just Ethan. Dr. Voss nodded, processing the information. We're going to run a few more tests today. Some blood work, maybe another scan. We want to figure out exactly what's making you feel sick so we can help you feel better. Ethan nodded. He didn't cry, didn't complain. Just lay there with an acceptance that seemed wrong for someone his age. Mr. Paulson finally spoke. Is it his appendix? The ER doctor said maybe, but then the scans were unclear. We're not ruling anything out, Dr. Voss said, but we're going to be thorough. I want to make sure we're treating the right problem. Could it be something else? Something worse? Mrs. Paulson's voice was tight with anxiety. Dr. Voss's expression remained calm. There are several conditions that can cause abdominal pain in children. Some are more serious than others. Right now we're gathering information. Once we have a clearer picture, we'll know the best course of treatment. It was a masterclass in communication, honest without being alarming, informative without making promises. I filed it away for future reference. After we left the room, Dr. Voss stopped me in the hallway. What do you think? The question caught me off guard. I was supposed to be observing, following, learning, not diagnosing. The presentation fits appendicitis, I said carefully, but the imaging doesn't support it. So what else? I ran through the differential diagnosis in my head. Gastroenteritis, constipation, kidney stones, rare in children but possible, inflammatory bowel disease, intussusception, mesenteric lymphadenitis. Could be a viral infection causing mesenteric lymphadenitis, I suggested. That would explain the elevated white count and the abdominal pain without the classic appendix findings. Dr. Voss nodded slowly. Possibly. Order a comprehensive metabolic panel and a repeat complete blood count. I want to see if his numbers are trending up or down, and add a urinalysis. Sometimes bladder infections present as abdominal pain in children. Should we consult surgery? Not yet. Let's see what the labs tell us. She walked away down the corridor, already moving on to the next patient. I stood there for a moment, looking back at the closed door of room 314. Something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Just off. Like a note played slightly flat in a symphony, technically present but harmonically incorrect. I couldn't name it, but I could feel it. The rest of the morning rounds passed in a blur of cheerful interactions with children who were, as Dr. Webb had promised, resilient. A 6-year-old recovering from a tonsillectomy who was already demanding ice cream. A 10-year-old with a broken arm from a skateboard accident who wanted to show me the signatures his classmates had left on his cast. A 14-year-old with diabetes who was learning to manage her insulin pump and seemed more annoyed by the hospital stay than worried about her health. There was a 3-year-old with pneumonia who smiled at me despite the oxygen cannula in her nose. An 11-year-old recovering from an emergency appendectomy who was already asking when he could play basketball again. A teenage girl with Crohn's disease who was more concerned about missing homecoming than about her flare-up. Pediatrics had a different energy than the adult floors. There was sadness here, plenty of it, but there was also this undercurrent of hope. Kids healed faster. They adapted. They moved forward. But every time I passed room 314, I felt that wrongness again. At noon, the lab results came back for Ethan. I pulled them up on the computer terminal at the nurse's station. White blood cell count, 16,000, up from 14,000 the night before. C-reactive protein, elevated at 4.2, a marker of inflammation in the body. Everything else was normal. Kidney function, liver function, electrolytes, all within expected ranges. I found Dr. Voss in the attending physician's office, a small room crammed with medical textbooks and coffee-stained mugs. She was reviewing another patient's chart, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "His white count is climbing," I said. She looked up from the patient chart she was reviewing. "How fast?" 2,012 hours. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. "And the pain?" "I checked on him 30 minutes ago. Still 8 out of 10. The morphine is barely touching it." Dr. Voss stood up, setting the chart aside. "We're consulting surgery. If his appendix is inflamed and we can't see it clearly on imaging, we might need to do an exploratory laparotomy. You think it's still appendicitis?" "I think we're running out of other options, and I think his condition is worsening despite antibiotics. That concerns me." We walked back to room 314 together. Inside, Mrs. Paulson was sitting in the chair beside Ethan's bed, holding his hand. Mr. Paulson had left, probably went to work or home to check on things. The boy's face was pale now, slicked with sweat. His breathing had become shallow. Dr. Voss examined him again, this time more thoroughly. When she pressed on the lower right quadrant of his abdomen, Ethan cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound that made his mother flinch. "I'm sorry," Dr. Voss said softly. "I know it hurts." She turned to Mrs. Paulson. "I'm going to call Dr. Rivera from Pediatric Surgery. We need to evaluate whether Ethan needs an operation." "An operation?" The mother's voice cracked. "But you said the scans showed—" "Sometimes the scans don't show everything, and Ethan's condition is worsening. We need to be proactive." Mrs. Paulson looked at her son, then back at Dr. Voss. "What happens if it's not his appendix? What if you operate and it's something else?" It was a fair question. Surgery carried risks, anesthesia, infection, complications. And if we were wrong about the diagnosis, we'd be subjecting a child to an unnecessary procedure. "We won't operate unless Dr. Rivera believes it's necessary," Dr. Voss said, "but I want him to evaluate Ethan as soon as possible. The fact that his white count is rising and his pain is worsening despite treatment tells me we need a surgical opinion." Mrs. Paulson's hand tightened around Ethan's. Okay, whatever he needs." After Dr. Voss left to make the call, I stayed in the room. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because Ethan's eyes had found mine again, and there was something in them that kept me rooted to the floor. "Dr. Reyes?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yeah, buddy? Am I going to die?" The question hit me like a physical force. Mrs. Paulson's hand flew to her mouth. I moved closer to the bed, kneeling down so I was at eye level with him. "No, Ethan, you're not going to die. We're going to figure out what's making you feel sick, and we're going to fix it. It really hurts. I know, I'm so sorry it hurts. My friend Jacob had to have his appendix out last year. He said it hurt really bad, but then after the surgery he felt better, Like, immediately better. That's right. Surgery can help sometimes. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, do you think I need surgery? I should have deflected the question. I should have told him that Dr. Voss and the surgical team would make that decision. I should have stayed safely within the bounds of what a second-week resident is supposed to say. Instead, I said, I think we're going to do everything we can to make you feel better. Whatever that takes. He nodded. Then he closed his eyes again, exhausted from the brief conversation. I stood up. Mrs. Paulson was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe. Or desperation. Or both. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for being honest with him. For not treating him like he's too young to understand. He deserves honesty. Not every doctor thinks that way. I left the room before I could say something else I wasn't qualified to promise. Dr. Marcus Rivera arrived 45 minutes later. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples and the kind of confident posture that comes from performing hundreds of successful surgeries. He wore blue surgical scrubs beneath his white coat, like he'd just stepped out of the operating room and might step back in at any moment. Dr. Voss, Dr. Rivera, and I stood outside room 314 while he reviewed Ethan's chart on a tablet. CT scan shows intestinal inflammation but normal appendix, Rivera said, scrolling through the images. White count trending up, fever persistent, severe pain localized to the right lower quadrant. He looked up. Has anyone considered Meckel's diverticulum? I knew what that was. A small pouch in the small intestine, a leftover from fetal development that most people have no idea exists. It usually causes no problems, but occasionally it can become inflamed or bleed or cause obstruction, and it wouldn't show up on a standard CT scan without specific contrast. Dr. Voss nodded. It's on the differential, but it's rare. Appendicitis is common, Rivera said, but his appendix looks fine. If we're going to take him to surgery, I want to be reasonably certain we're solving the problem, not just exploring. So, what do you recommend? Dr. Voss asked. Meckel's scan. It's non-invasive. If it's positive, we know what we're dealing with. If it's negative, we revisit the appendix question. Dr. Voss considered this. How long will it take to get the scan? Radiology can probably fit him in this afternoon. Results within a few hours. Then if the pain worsens before then we operate. But let's get the information we need first. Dr. Rivera went into the room to examine Ethan himself. Dr. Voss and I stayed in the hallway. What do you think? She asked me. I hesitated. I think something is really wrong, and I don't know if we're going to figure it out in time. She looked at me sharply. In time for what? I don't know. That's the problem. For the first time since I'd met her, Dr. Voss's expression softened slightly. That feeling, that instinct that something isn't right, pay attention to it. It's your brain processing information faster than you can consciously articulate, but don't let it paralyze you. Use it to push harder for answers. How do you balance that? The instinct versus the evidence? You don't. You hold both in tension. The instinct tells you something is wrong. The evidence tells you what to do about it. And sometimes, like today, you have to wait for the evidence to catch up to the instinct. That's the hardest part of medicine, knowing when to act and when to wait. Dr. Rivera emerged from the room. Let's get the Meckel's scan. In the meantime, continue IV antibiotics and pain management, and watch him closely. If his condition deteriorates, page me immediately. The scan was scheduled for 3 p.m. I checked on Ethan twice more before then. Each time, he seemed a little worse, a little paler, a little more withdrawn. The second time I visited, around 2 p.m., Mrs. Paulson was on the phone in the hallway. I could hear fragments of her conversation. Don't know yet. They're running more tests. I need you here, Tom. I can't do this alone. Through the window in the door, I could see Ethan lying in bed, his face turned toward the wall. He looked so small, so vulnerable. I pushed the door open quietly and walked to his bedside. Hey, Ethan, how are you feeling? He turned his head slowly. Tired. I bet. You're working really hard to fight this infection. Is that what it is? An infection? We think so. That's what the antibiotics are for, to help your body fight it. Then why do I still hurt? It was a good question. One I didn't have a good answer for. Sometimes infections take time to respond to medicine, but we're watching you really carefully. And if we need to do something different, we will. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Dr. Reyes, are you scared? The question surprised me. What do you mean? You're new. I heard the nurses talking. They said you're a resident. That means you're still learning, right? That's right. So are you scared? When you don't know what's wrong with someone? I could have lied. Could have told him that doctors are never scared, that we're always confident, always in control. But Ethan had already proven he could see through that kind of comfortable fiction. "Yeah," I said. "Sometimes I am scared, especially when someone I'm taking care of isn't getting better as fast as I want them to. But you stay anyway." "Of course I stay. My dad leaves when he's scared, when things get hard. He goes to work, or goes for a drive, or goes anywhere except where the scary thing is." I glanced toward the hallway, where Mrs. Paulson was still on the phone, probably calling that same father back. "Everyone handles fear differently," I said carefully. "But being scared doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It just means you care about the outcome." Ethan thought about this. "I'm scared too." "I know, buddy, that makes sense. But I'm staying too, because I don't have a choice." The wisdom of children. Sometimes they cut right through to the truth in ways that adults spend years trying to articulate. At 2:30, his fever spiked to 103.8. At 2:45, his heart rate jumped to 130 beats per minute. At 2:55, he vomited blood. I was at the nurse's station when the alarm went off in room 314. Not a loud, screaming code blue alarm, just the steady, insistent beeping of a monitor alerting us that something had changed. I ran. When I burst through the door, Mrs. Paulson was standing beside the bed, her hands covering her mouth, staring at the dark red stain spreading across the white sheets. Ethan was sitting up, bent forward, retching violently. More blood splattered onto the bed. "Get Dr. Voss!" I shouted to the nurse who had followed me in. "And page Dr. Rivera. Tell him we need him now." I moved to Ethan's side. His eyes were wide with terror. Blood dripped from his chin. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're going to be okay. We're here. We've got you." But I wasn't sure I believed my own words. Upper gastrointestinal bleeding in a child. The differential diagnosis flashed through my mind like emergency lights. Esophageal varices, peptic ulcer, Mallory-Weiss tear from vomiting, or, God, internal bleeding from something we'd missed entirely. The nurse handed me gloves. I pulled them on, my hands shaking slightly. "Ethan, I need you to try to stay calm," I said. "Take slow breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth." He tried. He really did. But his breathing was ragged, panicked. Mrs. Paulson was crying now. "What's happening? Why is he bleeding?" "We're going to find out," I said. "Right now, I need you to step back and let us work." Another nurse entered with a blood pressure cuff. She wrapped it around Ethan's arm while I checked his pulse. Fast, but strong. That was good. No signs of shock yet, but the amount of blood was concerning. Too much to be just from irritation. This was active bleeding from somewhere in his gastrointestinal tract. Dr. Voss arrived first, moving with controlled urgency. She assessed the situation in seconds. "Get an IV bolus of fluids running, type in cross for 2 units of blood, call radiology and cancel the Meckel's scan. We're going straight to surgery." "Surgery?" Mrs. Paulson's voice was rising. "What are they going to do?" "We don't have time to explain right now," Dr. Voss said, not unkindly. "Your son is bleeding internally. We need to stop the bleeding." Dr. Rivera appeared in the doorway. He took one look at the blood-soaked sheets and nodded. "Prep the OR. We're doing an exploratory laparotomy now." "Wait!" Mrs. Paulson grabbed Dr. Rivera's arm. "What does that mean? What are you going to do to him?" Dr. Rivera's voice was firm, but kind. "Your son is bleeding internally. We need to open his abdomen and find the source of the bleeding. If we don't, he could go into shock. But you don't even know what's wrong. That's why we need to look. Mrs. Paulson, I know this is terrifying, but we don't have time. Your son needs surgery right now." The surgical team arrived with a gurney. They moved quickly, transferring Ethan from the bed, connecting portable monitors, starting additional IV lines. Everything was happening so fast. Mrs. Paulson was signing consent forms with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. "Where's Tom? I called him. Where is he?" "We can't wait," Dr. Rivera said gently. "We need to go now." And then Ethan looked at me again, through the chaos, through the fear. Those green eyes found mine. "Dr. Reyes?" I moved to the side of the gurney. "I'm here. Am I going to die?" This time I didn't hesitate. "No," I said. "Dr. Rivera is one of the best surgeons in this hospital. He's going to take care of you. And when you wake up, you're going to feel so much better. I promise." It was a promise I had no right to make. But in that moment, it was the only thing I had to give him. They wheeled him out of the room. Mrs. Paulson followed, still crying, still calling her husband's name. Dr. Voss and I stood in the empty room, surrounded by blood-stained sheets and the lingering smell of fear. "You did well," she said quietly. "I didn't do anything. I didn't figure it out. You stayed calm, you reassured the patient, that matters. But it didn't feel like enough." The surgical waiting room on the 4th floor was painted a calming shade of blue, with uncomfortable chairs arranged in rows facing a television that nobody was watching. Mrs. Paulson sat in the corner, her phone clutched in her hands, staring at nothing. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had other patients to check on, other work to do, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. Dr. Voss had returned to the pediatric ward, but she'd told me to stay updated on the surgery and report back, so I waited. 15 minutes after Ethan went into surgery, Mr. Paulson arrived. He was out of breath, his face flushed like he'd been running. When he saw his wife, he rushed over. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Traffic was..." She didn't let him finish, just stood up and collapsed into his arms, sobbing. I looked away, giving them privacy. 1 hour passed, then 2. The waiting room had a clock on the wall that ticked loudly enough to hear during the quiet moments. I found myself counting the seconds between ticks, like measuring the space between heartbeats. A hospital volunteer came by with coffee. Mrs. Paulson took a cup, but didn't drink it. Mr. Paulson paced, back and forth, wearing a path in the institutional carpet. I thought about Ethan, about those green eyes, about the question he'd asked me twice now. Am I going to die? I thought about all the promises I'd been taught never to make. Never promise a patient they'll be okay. Never guarantee outcomes. Never give false hope. But what else could I have said? What else could I have given him in that moment, except hope? At the 3-hour mark, I started to panic. Exploratory surgery shouldn't take this long unless they'd found something complicated, or unless something had gone wrong. I was about to go find a phone to call the OR when Dr. Rivera appeared in the doorway. He was still in his surgical scrubs, his mask hanging loosely around his neck. There was blood on his shoe covers. His expression was unreadable. Mrs. Paulson shot to her feet. Ethan is stable," Dr. Rivera said immediately. "He's in recovery. The surgery went well." The relief that flooded through me was almost physical. Mrs. Paulson's knees buckled, and her husband caught her. They held each other, crying. "What did you find?" I asked. Dr. Rivera sat down across from us, and I noticed how tired he looked. Not just physically tired, emotionally tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from holding someone's life in your hands for 3 hours. "It wasn't his appendix," he said. "It was a Meckel's diverticulum, exactly what I suspected, but it was more complicated than usual. The diverticulum had created an internal hernia, causing a portion of his small intestine to become twisted and trapped. That's why he was in so much pain. The twisting cut off blood supply to that section of bowel, which caused it to become ischemic. That's medical terminology for tissue dying from lack of oxygen. And the bleeding?" Mr. Paulson asked. The ischemic tissue had started to ulcerate. Essentially, the tissue was dying and breaking down, which caused bleeding into the gastrointestinal tract. That's what he vomited up. Mrs. Paulson covered her mouth. "Oh my God. If we hadn't operated when we did," Dr. Rivera continued, "that section of bowel would have perforated, burst open, and spilled bacteria into his abdomen. He would have developed sepsis. That's a life-threatening infection of the bloodstream." The room was silent for a moment. The weight of what almost happened hung in the air. "So what now?" I asked. I removed the Meckel's diverticulum and the damaged section of intestine, about 15 centimeters total. I reconnected the healthy portions. The surgery itself went smoothly. No complications. Ethan will need to stay in the hospital for about a week while he heals. He'll be on IV antibiotics to prevent infection. But his prognosis is excellent. Kids his age heal remarkably well. Mrs. Paulson was crying again, but this time from relief. "Can I see him?" "Once he's fully awake from anesthesia, the nurses will bring you back to the recovery room, probably another 30 minutes or so." After the Paulsons left to call family members with the good news, Dr. Rivera turned to me. "You were in the room when he started bleeding?" "Yes. That was good instinct, staying close to him. A lot of residents would have left after the initial examination, would have been at lunch or checking on other patients, but you were there when he needed someone. I felt like something was wrong." Dr. Rivera nodded. "Trust that feeling. Medicine is part science, part art, and part instinct. The science tells you what's possible. The art tells you what's probable. But instinct tells you what's happening right now, in this specific patient, at this specific moment. Don't ignore it." He stood up, joints cracking slightly. "I need to go check on another patient." "But Dr. Reyes," You should feel good about today. You helped save that kid's life. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that I hadn't diagnosed anything, hadn't performed the surgery, hadn't done any of the things that actually mattered. But maybe he was right. Maybe just being there, just paying attention, just feeling that wrongness and refusing to let it go, maybe that was enough. I went back to the pediatric ward and found Dr. Voss in the attending physician's office. Meckel's diverticulum, I said. With internal hernia and ischemic bowel. She looked up. Serious. Dr. Rivera said we got him there just in time. Another hour and the bowel would have perforated. Did he now? There was something in her voice. Not skepticism exactly, but something close to it. I sat down in the chair across from her desk. You knew, I said. You knew something was really wrong. I suspected. Then why didn't we operate sooner? Dr. Voss removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. She suddenly looked very tired. Because medicine isn't a video game, Dr. Reyes. We don't just start cutting people open because we have a bad feeling. We need evidence. We need data. We need to rule out the common things before we jump to the rare ones. Yes, I suspected something serious. But if I'd sent him to surgery 6 hours earlier based only on suspicion, and Dr. Rivera had opened him up and found nothing, or found something that would have resolved on its own, then I would have subjected a 7-year-old child to unnecessary surgery, unnecessary anesthesia, unnecessary risk. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that we should have known sooner, that we should have diagnosed it faster. And you're right. In a perfect world, with perfect scans and perfect information, we would have. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where pediatric internal hernias are so rare that most general practitioners will never see one in their entire careers. We live in a world where CT scans have limitations. We live in a world where we have to balance the risk of action against the risk of inaction, and sometimes we don't know which is worse until afterward. She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk. Do you know what would have happened if we'd waited another hour to operate? His bowel would have died. He would have gone into septic shock. He might have died. Exactly. And do you know what would have happened if we'd operated 6 hours earlier, before the bleeding started? I thought about it. We might have found the problem, might have fixed it before the bowel became ischemic. Or we might have found a Meckel's diverticulum that wasn't causing any immediate problems and removed it prophylactically, which is a reasonable thing to do. But the surgery itself carries risks, anesthesia complications, post-operative infections, bowel adhesions that could cause problems years down the line. She put her glasses back on. There's no perfect answer, Dr. Reyes. There's only the best answer we can give with the information we have in the moment we have it. I sat quietly, processing this. Did I make the right call? Dr. Voss asked. It took me a moment to realize she was actually asking me, not rhetorically, not as a teaching exercise. She genuinely wanted to know what I thought. I chose my words carefully. I think you did everything right based on what you knew. And I think Ethan is alive because you didn't ignore the signs when they became clear. You escalated appropriately. You brought in surgery. You acted decisively when you needed to. She smiled. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. You're going to be a good doctor, Dr. Reyes. You care, and you're not afraid to sit with uncertainty. Those two qualities together are rare. Most doctors have one or the other. You have both. I don't feel like I have either right now. That's because you're still learning. Give it time. The confidence will come, but don't lose the humility. Don't lose the willingness to question yourself. That's what keeps doctors honest. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Dr. Voss said, "You know what the hardest part of medicine is?" "What?" "Living with the knowledge that we can't save everyone. That sometimes we make all the right decisions and the patient still dies. Or we make what seems like a wrong decision and the patient lives. The outcomes don't always match the quality of our thinking. And that's terrifying, because it means we're never fully in control. So how do you live with that? You focus on what you can control. Your attention, your effort, your willingness to keep learning. And you trust that over time, over hundreds and thousands of decisions, doing the right things will lead to the right outcomes more often than not." She stood up. "Come on, let's go check on our other patients. The work doesn't stop because one case went well." I visited Ethan every day for the next week. On day 2, he was awake and alert, though heavily medicated for pain. The post-surgical grogginess had worn off, and he was back to being a normal 7-year-old boy, which meant he had questions. Did they really cut me open? They did. Can I see the scar? Once it heals a little more. Is it big? Not too big. Maybe this long. I held my hands about 6 inches apart. Cool. Only a kid would think surgery scars were cool. He told me about his favorite video games. I told him about medical school. We made a deal. If he took his medications without complaining, I'd bring him a comic book. On day 3, he started eating solid foods again. His mother brought him chicken nuggets from his favorite restaurant, and he ate half of them before falling asleep mid-bite. His father sat in the corner chair, reading work emails on his phone but looking up every few minutes to check on his son. The dynamic between the parents had shifted. They were talking more, touching more. Mr. Paulson had taken time off work to be at the hospital every day. Whatever distance had existed between them before seemed to be closing. Crisis has a way of clarifying what matters. On day 4, I brought him a Spider-Man comic. He read the whole thing in one sitting, then asked if I had more. "I'll see what I can find," I said. "Do you like Spider-Man?" "Sure. He's cool because he's scared all the time, but he does the hero stuff anyway. That's what my dad says real courage is. Doing it even when you're scared." I glanced at Mr. Paulson, who was pretending not to listen to our conversation. "Your dad's right," I said. On day 5, his fever finally broke. His white blood cell count started trending down toward normal. The incision on his abdomen was healing well. No signs of infection, no drainage, just clean edges knitting back together. Dr. Voss examined him that morning and declared herself satisfied with his progress. "You're a fighter," she told Ethan. "My mom says I get that from her," Ethan replied. Mrs. Paulson smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen on her face since we admitted her son. On day 6, Dr. Rivera removed the surgical staples. Ethan barely flinched. He watched the whole procedure with fascinated curiosity, asking questions about how staples were different from stitches and whether he'd have a cool scar forever. "Forever," Dr. Rivera confirmed. "Battle scar. You earned it," Ethan grinned. "Can I show it at school?" "Once it's healed, sure, but give it a few more weeks." On day 7, Dr. Voss declared him ready to go home. I was in the room when the discharge papers were signed. Mrs. Paulson was packing Ethan's clothes and toys into a duffel bag, and the relief on her face was almost palpable, like she'd been holding her breath for a week and could finally exhale. Mr. Paulson stood beside his son's bed, one hand on Ethan's shoulder. They'd found something during this week, or maybe remembered something they'd forgotten. The way they looked at each other now was different, softer. Ethan was sitting up in bed, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that said, "Future Astronaut." He looked like a regular kid again. Not a patient, not a medical case, just a 7-year-old boy ready to go home and play video games and complain about homework and do all the normal things that 7-year-olds are supposed to do. "Dr. Reyes?" he said as I was about to leave. "Yeah? Thank you for not lying to me." I stopped. "What do you mean?" "When I asked if I was going to die, you told me I wasn't, and you were right." I knelt down beside the bed. "Ethan, I have to be honest with you. When you asked me that question, I didn't know for sure if you were going to be okay. I hoped you would be. I believed you would be, but I didn't know." He thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "But you stayed with me anyway." "Yeah, I did. That's what heroes do. They stay even when they're scared." Out of the mouths of babes, Mrs. Paulson walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. "We can never thank you enough," she said. "You and Dr. Voss and Dr. Rivera, you saved his life. We were just doing our jobs." "No," she shook her head firmly. "You were doing more than that. You cared. He felt that. I felt that. It made a difference." Mr. Paulson extended his hand. "Thank you, Dr. Reyes, for everything, for being there, for staying." I shook his hand. "Take care of each other." "We will." After they left, I stood in the empty room for a long time. The bed had been stripped. The monitors were silent. The whiteboard on the wall had been erased, ready for the next patient. But I could still see Ethan's face, still hear his question, "Am I going to die?" And I realized something. Every patient asks that question in one way or another, sometimes out loud, sometimes silently, sometimes with words, sometimes with their eyes, sometimes with the way they grip the edge of the gurney like it's the only solid thing in a world that's suddenly become terrifyingly uncertain. And our job, my job, wasn't just to answer the question. It was to stand beside them while they asked it, to be present in their fear, to acknowledge the weight of what they were facing while refusing to let them face it alone. That, I realized, was what Dr. Voss had meant when she said I cared. 3 weeks later, I received an envelope in my mailbox at the hospital. Inside was a crayon drawing. It showed 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing side by side. The small figure was labeled me. The tall figure was labeled Dr. Noah. Above the figures, written in careful, childish handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for staying." At the bottom of the page, in smaller letters, P.S. I got to show my scar at school, and everyone thought it was cool. I pinned the drawing to the bulletin board in the residence lounge, next to the schedule rotations and the coffee shop coupons, and the reminders about mandatory training sessions. Dr. Marcus Webb saw it later that day. "First pediatric save?" he asked. Not sure I'd call it a save, I just didn't leave. Sometimes that's the same thing. I thought about Ethan's words. They stay even when they're scared. "Yeah," I said. "I guess it is." Dr. Webb studied the drawing for a moment. "You know what's interesting about pediatrics? Kids remember. Adults forget. They remember the diagnosis maybe, or the prescription, but they forget the person who gave it to them. Kids remember. 20 years from now, that kid will remember you. I didn't do anything special. You stayed. In a moment when he was terrified and in pain and didn't understand what was happening to his body, you stayed. That's everything, Reyes." He walked away, leaving me alone with the drawing. I thought about what staying meant. Not just physically being present in a room, but emotionally present, mentally present, willing to sit with uncertainty and fear and not run from it. That's what Ethan had taught me. That presence itself is a form of treatment. That sometimes the most important medicine we can offer is our attention. My pediatric rotation officially started 2 months later. By then, I'd completed rotations in cardiology, pulmonology, and infectious disease. I'd seen heart attacks and pneumonia and sepsis. I'd watched people recover and watched people die. I'd made diagnoses I was proud of and misdiagnoses I'd carry with me forever. But I remembered Ethan. On my first official day in pediatrics, Dr. Voss pulled me aside before morning rounds. "I requested you specifically for this rotation," she said. "Why? Because you have the instinct, and because you care. Those two things together are rare. Most residents have one or the other. You have both. I didn't do anything special with Ethan. You stayed present. You paid attention. You trusted your gut when something felt wrong. And when he asked you the hardest question a patient can ask, you gave him an honest answer wrapped in hope. That's not nothing, Dr. Reyes. That's everything." She handed me a tablet with the morning's patient list. "You're going to make mistakes in this rotation," she continued. "You're going to second-guess yourself. You're going to feel inadequate and overwhelmed and exhausted. That's normal. That's part of the process. But remember, the patients don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. Can you do that?" I looked at the list of names on the screen. 8 children, 8 families, 8 lives intersecting with mine for however long they needed us. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." And I meant it. Because Ethan had taught me something that no textbook could. That medicine isn't just about the diagnosis or the treatment or even the cure. It's about the space between doctor and patient. That sacred territory where fear meets hope, where uncertainty meets trust, where one human being looks at another and asks the most vulnerable question imaginable. Am I going to be okay? And the answer we give, whether with words or presence or simply refusing to look away, that answer matters. Sometimes it matters as much as the surgery itself. During that rotation, I saw dozens of children. Some were sicker than Ethan. Some were less sick. Each one taught me something different. I learned that a 5-year-old with leukemia could be braver than most adults I knew. I learned that sometimes the best medicine is sitting on the floor and playing with toy cars for 20 minutes. I learned that parents who seem angry are usually just terrified, and that behind every difficult family member is someone who loves that child so much it's destroying them to watch them suffer. I learned that children are remarkably resilient, but they're also remarkably perceptive. They know when you're lying to them. They know when you're scared. And they forgive you for both as long as you don't leave. I learned to read the subtle signs of deterioration, the slight increase in respiratory rate, the way a child stops making eye contact, the particular quality of silence that precedes a crash. I learned that pediatric medicine is a marathon of small observations, each one building on the last, creating a picture that's clearer than any single data point could provide. And I learned that being a doctor means carrying the weight of these experiences with you. Every success, every failure, every close call, every loss. One afternoon near the end of my pediatric rotation, I found myself in the attending physician's office with Dr. Voss. We'd just finished a particularly difficult case, a 3-year-old with severe pneumonia who'd required intubation. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Tired, overwhelmed, scared I'm going to make a mistake that kills someone," she nodded. Good. The day you stop being scared is the day you become dangerous. Fear keeps you humble, keeps you checking and double-checking, keeps you asking for help when you need it. But how do you function when you're scared all the time? You learn to carry it. You acknowledge it. You let it sharpen your focus rather than paralyze your judgment, and you trust your training. Trust your colleagues. Trust the process. She leaned back in her chair. You know what I've learned in 15 years of pediatrics? The best doctors aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who care the most, who pay attention, who stay present even when it's hard. You have that quality, Dr. Reyes. Don't lose it. What if caring too much makes me less effective? What if I get so emotionally invested that I can't think clearly? There's a balance. You'll find it. But I'd rather have a resident who cares too much than one who doesn't care at all. Caring too much can be managed. Not caring enough can't be taught. I thought about Ethan, about how invested I'd become in his case, about how his question had haunted me. Do you ever think about the patients? I asked. Years later, do they stay with you? The important ones do. The ones who teach you something. The ones who change you. Those stay forever. Does it get easier? Carrying all of them? No, she said simply. But you get stronger. It's been 6 months since I met Ethan Paulson. I'm still a resident, still learning, still making mistakes and staying up late reading medical journals and questioning whether I'm good enough, smart enough, fast enough to do this job the way it deserves to be done. But I think about that moment in room 314 every single day. Am I going to die? The truth is, I'll never be able to promise any patient that they won't. Medicine doesn't work that way. The human body is too complicated, too fragile, too unpredictable. We can fight, we can hope, we can use every tool at our disposal, but we can't guarantee outcomes. What we can guarantee is presence. We can show up, we can pay attention, we can trust our instincts when they whisper that something is wrong. We can ask the hard questions and sit with the uncomfortable answers. We can acknowledge fear without being consumed by it. And when a patient asks us if they're going to die, we can look them in the eyes and say, I'm here, I'm not leaving, we're going to fight this together. Sometimes that's enough, sometimes that's everything. Ethan's drawing still hangs in the residence lounge. Every time I see it, every time I walk past those two crayon figures standing side by side, I'm reminded of why I wanted to become a doctor in the first place. Not to be perfect, not to know everything, but to stay, even when I'm scared. Especially when I'm scared, because that's what heroes do. And maybe on the best days, that's what doctors do too. The hospital continues its rhythm around me. New patients arrive, old patients leave. Some go home healthy, some don't go home at all. Each case teaches me something new. Each patient changes me in ways I'm only beginning to understand. I've learned that medicine is as much about listening as it is about treating. That sometimes the most powerful intervention isn't a medication or a procedure. It's simply being willing to sit with someone in their fear and not turn away. I've learned that instinct matters. That the feeling in my gut when something isn't right is worth paying attention to, even when I can't immediately explain why. I've learned that caring isn't a weakness. It's the foundation of everything else. Without it, we're just technicians. With it, we become healers. And I've learned that the question, am I going to die, is really asking something deeper. Will you stay with me? Will you see me? Will you fight for me even if the odds are bad? And the answer, the only answer, is yes. Always. Yes. The fluorescent lights in St. Halstead Hospital still hum at that particular frequency that makes my skull ache. The white coat still feels too heavy and not heavy enough. The questions still come faster than the answers. But now, when I walk through those sliding doors at the start of each shift, I carry something I didn't have 6 months ago. I carry Ethan's voice. I carry his question. I carry his trust. And I carry the knowledge that sometimes the most important thing a doctor can do isn't diagnosing or treating or prescribing. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply refuse to walk away. My name is Noah Reyes. I'm a resident at St. Halstead Hospital, and I'm learning that being a doctor means staying present in the moments when everything in you wants to run. Because on the other side of fear, on the other side of uncertainty, is a 7-year-old boy asking if he's going to die. And he deserves an answer. He deserves our presence. He deserves us to stay. Every patient does. That's the promise I make now, every single day. Not that I'll never make mistakes. Not that I'll always have the right answer. But that I'll stay. That I'll be present. That I'll care. Because in the end, that might be the most important medicine of all. I think about my parents, about the sacrifices they made, about my mother's tears when I told her I wanted to be a doctor, about what that meant to her. I'm learning to carry that too. The weight of their hopes, the responsibility of their dreams, the knowledge that I'm not just representing myself in this white coat. I'm representing everyone who believed I could do this when I wasn't sure I could. And maybe that's another form of staying true to the people who got me here, staying committed to the reasons I started this journey, staying connected to the humanity at the heart of medicine, even when the science threatens to overwhelm it. Ethan taught me that. A 7-year-old boy with green eyes and a question I couldn't answer. Am I gonna die? I still don't know how to answer that question. Not really, not honestly, but I know how to stay. And sometimes, that's the answer they're really looking for.